Sorry. That's fine, that's fine. We're going to start as Muslims do in the name of God. In Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Back, brothers and sisters and friends, I greet you with the warmest Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Which basically means may the peace and blessings upon you, of God be upon you all. Today's topic is a very interesting topic. I've never given a topic like this before. The humanity of Islamic rights. I actually tried to prepare some notes. I just came back from California today. And in preparing for the notes, I fell asleep. I think one of the reasons I fell asleep is because jet lag is terrible. I had hardly any sleep in my South Californian tour. But alhamdulillah, all grateful thanks are due to God, it was quite successful. I think it was a very important topic for the LSE ISOC to suggest, because I don't know if anyone heard David Cameron's talk recently. David Cameron, the interesting opportunist, what he did, he decided to go to Germany and give a speech that was resonant with some of the speeches of Hitler and his henchmen. He was obviously blaming the Muslim community for many things, particularly terrorism and extremism, and didn't want to widen the discussion and have a nuanced discussion on what really evokes people to do bad things and what really evokes people not to integrate well. So, one of his criteria, one of his tests for Muslim ethnic organizations was, do they believe in universal human rights? And this is why it's very important for us to discuss today, what does it mean to have rights in Islam? And my presentation is going to quickly overview some of the key rights that Islam gives human beings from an Islamic perspective. Then I'm going to discuss something very critical. The difference between a liberal conception of human rights and an Islamic conception of human rights. Because you know what, friends? They are different. And this is the thing. And there's nothing wrong with them being different. This is the precise problem that David Cameron does not understand. He thinks everybody must be the same. These values that he was talking about, he's assuming the whole of British society holds these values. That's not true. There's a plethora of academic studies that have been discussing what does it mean to be British. And by the way, it's been conflicting. We've had a myriad of responses. So you can only infer from this that what it means to be British is basically not to agree. And to agree to disagree. And I think this is a fundamental British value, if we have any values at all, the ones that we all agree on. So I'm going to discuss the difference between a liberal conception of human rights and an Islamic conception of human rights. After that, I'm going to discuss something about the ontological, which means the foundation for ethics, morality and rights from a religious perspective. So, let me talk about Islamic rights. Now, fundamentally, what we have to understand, Islam as a perspective, as a way of life, does not define itself as a religion. Okay? It's not just a dogma. It's not something that you just do on Sunday. It's not something you just do on Friday. Islam is a worldview. And this term in Arabic is deen. Okay? Deen is best described as a worldview rather than a religion. Because when you use the word religion, it has European connotations. European connotations, we think about the Middle Ages, we think about the Catholic Church oppressing the Europeans, the 30-year wars, the 80-year wars, the massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day. We think about, oppression. But when we think about deen, when we think about worldview, it's a different perspective. And Islam describes itself particularly as a worldview, which essentially means the set of assumptions, your philosophy on life, that you bring to your experience. Think about this very carefully. It's your set of assumptions or your philosophy of life that you bring to your experience rather than your experience bringing it to you. So this is what worldview means. How do you see the world? What glasses do you put on to interpret reality? And Islam tells us to wear the Islamic lenses, the Islamic glasses, which essentially means the affirmation and the actualization of Tawheed. And Tawheed in Arabic means the oneness of God, which means we solely single out God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for worship, seeking His help. We solely single Him out with regards to His names and attributes. If He is the merciful, that is seen in a oneness perspective, which means it transcends any limited conception of mercy. So when we think about God is love, al-wudud in Arabic, it means an excessive form of love to the point that we cannot make it contingent to a material reality, to a reality that could be anthropomorphic. It's a human type of love. This is why in the prophetic tradition, the Prophet told us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that God loves His servants more than a mother to his child. And this indicates it transcends human, anthropomorphic, materialistic reality. So this is what we mean by Tawheed, the oneness of God. So this is the fundamental essence of Islam. And from this, God has given us some rights. First and foremost, we have the famous one. Anyone guess what the famous one is? It's the right to life, okay? The right to be a human being, the right to live. And the Quran resonates with this right to life. The Quran says, whoever kills a human being, without any reason, like manslaughter or corruption on earth, it is tantamount. Think about this. It is equivalent, it is similar to killing the whole of humanity. This is the emphasis on the right to life from an Islamic perspective. Now, the Quran also says, do not kill a soul which Allah has made sacred except through a due process of law. Because the first verse discusses that you can kill, but in accordance with law. And this law, from an Islamic perspective, is based upon, similar to the Christian tradition, of the just war theory. When we have to defend ourselves, then the death of a human being is allowed from that legal framework. Significantly, Muslims believe in capital punishment. And it's not based on jungle justice. We don't want people dead. Rather, we see this as a deterrent to prevent people from escaping the general value sets and norms of particular society. But that's something we'll discuss later. Also, the Prophet Muhammad said in the prophetic tradition, the greatest sin is to associate something with God, which means polytheism. And as I discussed in the beginning, that Tawheed, the oneness of God, is the essence of Islam. And the Prophet said the two major transgressions are polytheism and killing human beings. So we can see safely that the right to life has been sanctioned from the Islamic perspective. The next right that Islam prioritizes is the right to the safety of life. There's no good just having life and if you're running away all the time or you're fearful. So Islam tells us that we should provide safety for human beings. And this is why the God says, and whoever saves a life, it is as though he has saved the whole of humanity. A conceptual, emotional, and spiritual driving force to indicate that we must facilitate an environment to take care of human beings. The third Islamic right, which I think differs from the liberal conception of human rights. If we look at the UN Charter of Human Rights, this doesn't exist. And actually, it emphasizes the respect and honor for women. And it singles out women. And I think this is the unique thing from the Islamic perspective. Because what we have to understand is that particularly in the Arabian society 1400 years ago, women were not dignified as human beings. Women were not dignified as human beings who could live in a society and be productive. Also, women were not dignified and honored to the point where not only could they be productive, but they could follow their natural inclination and desires in a very divine way, set out by the divine. This is why the Quran emphasizes do not approach adultery, for example. And also, people who accuse women of adultery, the punishment for them, for the accusation to be based on a lie or falsehood, is actually quite severe. So the Islamic framework actually puts a very harsh, suitably harsh deterrent to those people who want to defame, degrade, and dishonor women in our society. Because in Islam, we see women as a pillar of our society. It's actually the pillar which all other pillars revolve around. Because from the Islamic spiritual perspective, a woman is the first teacher of the scholar. From the way we learn about the social model of Islam. And the woman is the first protector of the one who's going to protect the state. The mujahid, as we say in Islam. So women has a very high status and honor in the Islamic tradition. Now this also raises questions about gender equality, and do we view things from the prism of equality? Is equality itself a valid perspective to look at differences between men and female? Is it ill-judged? Because does it make man the yardstick? So we could have all these discussions, but I think we should have them later. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Islam actually is unique in respecting the honor of the woman. And we saw this in history. When one woman was treated badly in history, one of the caliphs, he wrote a letter to Rome. And he said, to the dog of Rome. He was quite harsh. I'm bringing an army that its front is with you and its end is with me. And this is for just one woman who cried, help me. So this shows, I'm not saying that was right or wrong, I'm not making a value judgment on this, but it indicates that the protection and honor of women is paramount. And even if we see some, inverted commas, Islamist organizations, some of the constitution actually clearly says the woman must be honored. The next Islamic right is the right to a basic standard of life. Because we all know, no one wants to live a miserable life. Happiness is actually an end. It's not a means for human beings. For example, if I were to ask you, why do you want to get a job? You might say to me, because I want to get money. Why do you want to get money? Because I want to feed my kid. Why do you want to feed your kids? Because I love them. Why do you love them? Because it makes me happy. And you say, why does it make you happy? Why do you want to be happy? It doesn't need any justification. Okay? Happiness is an end in itself. And this is why Islam understands this and basically tries to facilitate an economic environment which provides food, shelter and clothing for everybody. The limited essential needs. There is a prophetic tradition that can be found in the books of Tirmidhi which says the son of Adam, meaning the human being, needs food, shelter and clothing. And these are the limited essential needs that the whole of society must have in order for everyone to be elevated. Rather than when we see in America, and I just came from America, 25% of America lives underneath the poverty ladder. 2 billion people live on under what? $2 a day. So there's a huge problem here. 100,000 children die every year from preventable diseases that we could pay for, and for issues such as the food crisis. Because Europe has really nasty kind of trade laws with Africa that facilitate an unjust economic system in Africa, but provides the growth for the capitalist Europe. And many people blame Adam Smith for this. But I don't think we should blame Adam Smith for this, because Adam Smith used to write that economic transactions must be moral transactions. Adam Smith wrote this. So I believe the 18th century founder of capitalism would have spat in the face of many of these world banks, in my opinion. Wallahi, which means by God. Okay? So, from an economic perspective, Islam facilitates the right for a basic standard of life. And also, as the Quran says, and in their wealth, there is acknowledged right for the needy and the destitute. And we even saw this at the time of the Caliph of Umar, Ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. When there was a famine, he acknowledged this right so severely, where he would be walking around the streets of Medina, and then he would find a woman, and this woman was boiling stones or boiling water to keep her children quiet because they were starving. And she didn't recognize him, but she saw him and said, I'm going to account the ruler. I'm going to account him. and bring him to account. Even when there's a famine, she knew that the right was that she should have food, shelter and clothing. This was a basic necessity in Islam. Umar, upon hearing this, what did he do? He walked back to the center of the city and to the Bayt al-Mal. The Bayt al-Mal is an Islamic concept of bank or resource center that is used to feed everybody, Muslim and non-Muslim. And when they found, when he went to the Bayt al-Mal, he picked up the resources and the food and he walked back. And his servant said, "Oh Umar, let me carry your luggage, the food and the provisions." What did Umar say? "You're not going to carry this, you're not going to carry my luggage on the day of judgment." Because he had some metaphysical accountability for this. And he went, and not only did he go, not only did he give the food, he cooked the food for them. Would David Cameron do that? He probably can't cook anyway. Just like he can't speak. So, the next right is individual right to liberty. Individual right to liberty. Now, Islam has clearly and categorically forbidden the primitive practice of capturing a free man. For example, the Prophet said in unequivocal words, "There are three categories of people against whom I shall myself be a plaintiff on the day of judgment. Of these three are, one is he who enslaves a free man, then sells him and eats this money." And this statement here is general, so it cannot be made specific. Rather, there could be no exceptions to people of a different race or color. Now, don't get me wrong, there is an Islamic conception of slavery, which we could discuss later, and I think we should discuss in the Q&A. But we should be careful of terminology here. Because when you think of slavery in the West, you think, chain him, take him to the cotton fields, don't feed him, etc., etc., etc. But the Islamic conception of slavery was actually not slavery at all. Because a slave, which basically just means you're working under a master, which is the equivalent of the working class here in my opinion, is that you have to have the same food as he does, you have to have the same clothes as he does, and all these rights that he has are quite amazing. To the point where the only nation that institutionalized a compassionate form of slavery, where the slave could become the leader of the nation. And we had this. Was it the Mamluks? Who knows the history? The Mamluks, they came from slaves. They were children of slaves. And they became the leaders of the nation. Now someone might say, what about Obama? Yeah? Obama obviously came from slaves. His father was black, right? Indonesian. So therefore, look, now he's leading a whole nation. But the point is, you have to understand that slavery is comprehensive. It's not only physical, but it's also mental. So he may have freed himself from mental slavery, but I think he's still colonized in some form. Especially when you see some of the economic and violent policies that he covertly delivers under his, mashallah, very beautiful smile. Anyway, the right to justice, another very important Islamic right. And to be honest, a lot of people say Islam is a religion of peace. It's not a religion of peace. It's a religion of way of life. And parts of way of life include justice as well. And many people said Islam is a religion of justice because the Quran says 3 times, Inna Allah yuhibbul muqsitin. Allah loves the just. God loves the just. Significantly, the Quran says, do not let the hatred, and this is very important, do not let the hatred of others make you swerve from justice. Be just for us closer to your duty. Also, the Quran says, be just even if it's against yourselves. Whether it's rich or poor, kith and kin, your family. Justice is very important. And we saw this in history. If you read the works from the Jewish historian Amnon Cohen, he collected 1,000 records from the 19th century Sidir records in the Ottoman Caliphate, the Ottoman period. And he saw that although the Christians and the Jews had the liberty and freedom to go to their own religious authorities for adjudication of disputes, they freely chose to go to the Qadi, to the Islamic judge. Freely. To the point most of them were women. Jewish women used to go to the Qadi to even argue that my husband doesn't give me nafaqah, which means maintenance. This was the reality of Islamic justice. The next right is equality of all human beings. For example, the Quran says, all mankind, we have created you from a male and a female. In other words, all human beings are essentially brothers. Because we have two concepts of brotherhood in Islam. We have an Islamic sense of brotherhood which transcends blood, and we have a very basic ontological understanding of brotherhood, which is we're sons and daughters of the same being. And that's the reality. Also, the Quran continues, and we have set you up as nations and tribes so that you may be able to recognize each other. Now, some people will say that this means it's about unity. No, this verse is not about unity, it's about distinction. Because if you know what makes you distinct, then now I can have a relationship with you. If you have a superficial understanding of who you are as a human being, then I don't know how to connect with you. But if you have a distinction, I am Hamza, I was born in Hackney, I come from Greek parentage, and I look Pakistani. Yeah? I'm distinct now as a human being. So you can know what you know how to have a relationship with me. So this distinction is very important. And really, if you want to see what Islam talks about equality, it also emphasizes that there may be a sense of inequality from a perspective of your state as a spiritual being. Because the Quran says, indeed, with an emphasis here, the noblest amongst you before God are the ones who are most God conscious. Now this doesn't mean there's these spiritual lords that are higher than everyone and I'm spiritual and pious and you're not. Haha. Yeah? It's none of that. It's more to show that there should be a driving force, that the only thing, if there's anything to make you distinct, it's not money, status, wealth, or color, but it's who you are as a human being. Imagine society was based upon this. We wouldn't have 65% of all 5 to 15-year-olds thinking what defines them is what they wear. This is the reality, people. And this has been exemplified by the Prophet when he said, no Arab has a superiority over a non-Arab. Nor does a non-Arab have any superiority over an Arab. Nor does a white man have any superiority over a black man, or the black man any superiority over the white man. You are all children of Adam, and Adam was created from clay. Indicating here, you come from the same stuff, man. You cut, you bleed. You cry, tears are the same color. Or no color, if you like. Yeah? We all cry in the same language. Yes or no? Good. You're human beings. Congratulations. Good. The next right is the right to cooperate and not to cooperate. This is very important. Now, the Quran says, cooperate with one another for virtue and heedfulness, and do not cooperate with one another for purpose of vice and aggression. Now, according to the Mufassirun, which means those who explain the Quran, the Quranic exegetes, like Qurtubi, they said this verse means that you have to cooperate with anyone. Gay, non-gay, black, non-white, non-black, white, non-white, Arab, this, that, with alien, even if it's an alien. If you go to the tafsir of Ibn Abbas, he talks about aliens 1400 years ago. Because the Quran says, we created the 7 heavens, the 7 universes, and we spread throughout them beasts. So there could be aliens. Open your mind. Yeah? We don't say there's no aliens. So if they do come down, we just give them dawah. We give them Islam. You know? Especially if they come and say, take me to your leader. Good. So, cooperate. But the Quran also says, you should not cooperate for those who are dealing with vice and aggression. And this is very important. So this means, even if people live on the North Pole, the South Pole, wherever they are, we have to have a right to cooperate with such people for the good. The next right is the security of life and property. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in his farewell speech during Hajj, he said, during the pilgrimage, he said, your lives and properties are forbidden to one another till you meet your Lord on the day of resurrection. Also, the Quran says, anyone who kills a believer deliberately will receive as his reward a sentence to live in hell forever. And there's an emotional driving force here. You do such a bad thing, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah? Also, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about not just Muslims but the whole of humanity, saying, whoever kills a man under our protection, dhimmi, under our protection, will not smell the fragrance of paradise. He also said, whoever harms a non-Muslim under our protection harms the Prophet himself. We saw the furore as a result of the Danish cartoons. 100 people died in Europe, dudes. 100 people. Embassies were burned because someone dishonored the name of the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet is telling us as Muslims, if you harm a non-Muslim under our protection, you harm the Prophet himself. And this is very important for us to take into consideration. Also, the Quran says, do not devour one's wealth by force and illegal means. So the security of life and property is established in the Islamic tradition. Also, which is unlike the liberal tradition, we have the protection of honor. The Quran says, O you who believe, do not let one set of people make fun of another set of people. Do not defame one another. Do not insult and do not backbite or speak ill of one another. Also, we have so many other rights here. For example, the sanctity and security of private life. As the Quran says, do not spy on one another. Do not enter the house without people's consent. Which even means you can't have a warrant. Because even Umar ibn al-Khattab, the caliph at the time, he went into someone's house, he caught him drinking and playing with women. And he could not use that against him on a court of law. Because the guy who was drinking reminded him, what you've done is illegal. I did something illegal too, but what you've done is illegal too. And the beauty of it is, when they met in the public place after a few months, or after some time, they both said, I repented from spying on people, and the man said, I repented from drinking alcohol and playing with women. Do you see the beauty of security and personal freedom? Also, we have the right to protest against tyranny. As the Quran says, God does not love the evil talk in public unless it is by someone who has been injured thereby, who has had some kind of oppression. Also, the Quran says, rather the Prophet ﷺ said, اتَّقُوا الظُّلْمَ فَإِنَّ الظُّلْمَ ظُلُمَاتٌ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Be conscious of oppression and injustice, for it's going to be darkness on the Day of Judgment. Also, we believe in a unique conception of freedom of expression. Now, I've spoken about this many times and have been misquoted many times as well by many people. Maybe I could say it straight here. See, Muslims believe in freedom of expression, but it has to be pegged on moral norms. And this is in line with the traditional liberal perspective, not the ridiculous neoliberal perspective. Because if you read the works of Thomas Paine and John Stuart Mill, what did they say? They said, when you speak or express yourself, you can't transcend moral norms. You're going to go against the very objectives of expression in the first place. Because historically, what was the objectives of freedom of speech? It was to acquire truth, to account governments, and to facilitate progress in science. These things are all fine, but they have to be done in a certain way, so there are restrictions to expression. For example, say we saw George Bush, and I wanted to account him for Iraq war. And I said to George Bush, I want to kill you, I'm going to rip your eyes out, I'm going to urinate in your brain, I'm going to put you through a misfeed machine. Is that a good way of accounting George Bush? But if I said, here's my army of legal advisors, yeah? This is a portfolio, a dossier against yourself, read it. That's you use expression now to facilitate the objectives of freedom of expression. My initial stance was, what's the point of speaking in the first place? So this is what Islam has to say about freedom of expression. Also, we have freedom of conscience and conviction. The Quran says there should be no coercion in religion, in matters of faith. And also we say that you have to protect religious sentiments. You can't just go into the Christian community and start saying, how can you believe God has a son? You crazy? You think God went to the toilet? Are you mad? What's your problem? You kafir? We can't speak like this to people. Quran doesn't allow us to do that. The Quran says, do not argue with the people of the book. And the value here is do not argue with anyone, unless it is in the most politest manner. قَوْلًا أَحْسَنًا. قَوْلًا أَحْسَنًا, beautiful speech. Also, we have the right that rulers are not above the law. The Caliph Umar even inflicted one of the penal codes to his own son. The Prophet ﷺ said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he would punish his own daughter if she was caught stealing, with the conditions in place and the due process and court of law. I have a section here that we even have rights of competence when we go engage in war. Now some people say, what are the rights of the non-combatants? Well, it's very simple in Islam. You can't kill them. You can't kill innocent human beings. But we even have rights to those who are fighting us. For example, you can't torture with fire, which means no white phosphorus. Did you see the photos in Palestine of babies being like tortured because of the perpetual heat from white phosphorus? You put water in it, you're still burning. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, punishment by fire does not, you shouldn't do it to anyone basically. Yeah? Protection of the wounded. The Prophet said, do not attack a wounded person. The prisoner of war should not be slain. The Prophet said, no prisoner should be put to the sword. And no one should be tied to be killed. The Prophet said that the killing of anyone who is tied or is in captivity is forbidden. No looting and destruction in the enemy's country. The Prophet said he prohibited believers from looting and plunder. The loot is no more lawful than the carrying. The Prophet also said, do not destroy villages and towns, do not spoil. Rather, sorry, not the Prophet, but his right-hand man, if you like, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He said, do not destroy the villages and towns, do not spoil the cultivated fields and gardens, and do not slaughter the cattle. Another right is the sanctity of a dead body. The Prophet prohibited us from mutilating dead bodies. The return of the corpses to the enemy. Someone came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I want to basically buy the bodies back. And the Prophet said, I do not sell bodies, you can take away the corpse of your fallen comrade. And also we have a prohibition of breaching of treaties. As the Prophet said, do not be guilty of the breach of treaties, the breach of faith. So there are many, many more Islamic conceptions of rights. You could fill manuals with these. But these were some just to get the thinking going and understand, you know what, Islam does give people rights. There's even a term classically on this called Huquq al-Ibad, the rights of the servant, the rights of the human being. But it differs from a liberal conception of human rights. Actually, one of the professors here at LSE, Professor Jean Charvet, he wrote the book, The Liberal Project in Human Rights. And he said, human rights as we know it is a specific liberal project. And the UN has been designed to bring this project to the rest of the world. We need to understand this and be frank and say, well, our tradition may agree with some of them, but some of them we don't. Because our underlying foundation for self and society is different. I remember one of the scholars said, if you talk about human rights, you first have to talk about what does it mean to be a human being. If you got that wrong, then whatever you're going to give him is wrong. And that's very important. And also, how do you prioritize these rights? Now, what we have to understand that the liberal notion of human rights is based upon a certain philosophy. And this philosophy is individualism. For example, the feminine philosopher Marilyn Friedman, she said, individualism underlies some important versions of liberal political theory. And what I mean individualism is not the kind of popular cultural sense of individualism. It's more termed, as Charles Taylor said, atomism. Now what is individualism? Well, individualism is the view that the human being is an abstract entity divorced of social attachments and obligations. This is the feminist philosopher's view. Yes, I'm a Muslim quoting the feminist philosopher. And there's nothing wrong with that. Do you know why? Because feminism has progressed from that old reaction to men. I want to go to the toilet the way he does. Yeah, and feminism is never like that. We need to be nuanced people, because feminism, especially from a social context, they agree with the type of honoring and the valuing of women and start to understand that we are different in many ways. Okay, there are feminists who believe in social constructionism, thinking that all our values have come from language and our notions of language in society have made us different. I disagree with that, but I like the other side of the feminist philosophy, which is actually looking at distinct human beings as distinct human beings. And it happens that men, from a psychological and physiological perspective, are obviously different from females. So, individualism is the basis for political theory, from a liberal political theory. And from an Islamic perspective, we say, is this a right view to look at the human being from an individualistic doctrine and individualistic philosophy? I would say no, for the following reasons. First and foremost, if we study developmental psychology, we see that psychology is moving away from what they call the independent constructor, which means this young child only learns individualistically. But rather now they're going towards a more Russian philosophy that children learn via social norms and practices. Also, individuality is based on aims and values. And the human being is a vessel of aims and values, and these can only be understood within a social context. This is why the political philosophers Shlomo Avneri and Ahmed Dashalek, they say, we cannot analyze human behavior as if it were abstract entities, as if their values existed somewhere in the distance, so to speak. And then they said this is the critique of the image of the person put forward by the individualists. Also, we need to understand that there are dynamic links between society and individual behavior in societies. For example, Vivian Burr, the social constructionist, she said, for example, in a capitalist society, competition is fundamental. Society is structured around individuals and organizations that compete with each other for jobs, markets, etc. So that where competition is a fundamental feature of socio-economic life, what you would get is competitive people. So the point she's trying to say is that society does affect the human being. You put competition in society, you're going to get competitive people. And one would argue that the foundations of the liberal worldview, such as individualism, has caused some things such as social breakdown. It's quite, the irony of David Cameron's speech, right, is he said we need to have more of a muscular liberalism, yeah? Which means more like, let's go forward and show people that you have to be liberal, otherwise you don't belong here, yeah? And this is ridiculous, because he's presumed liberalism to be true. He's presumed social liberalism to be true. He's presumed for it to be like gospel truth, written in stone. But this is not true at all. Let's go to the Children's Society report, published in 2009. It was called A Good Childhood Searching for Values in a Competitive Age. And it said, Britain and the US have more broken families than other countries, and our families are less cohesive in the way they live and eat together. British children are rougher with each other and live more riskily in terms of alcohol, drugs, and teenage pregnancy, and are less inclined to stay in education. Also, 11 children a day commit suicide in their own bedroom. And you may think, well, why do you blame liberalism? Well, let's go back to this report. And the report concluded, and it says, but we believe there is one common theme that links all of these problems. And guess what it said? Excessive individualism. And this is something that we fundamentally disagree with from an Islamic perspective, because we believe that our conception of self and society is not based on an individualistic doctrine. Our conception obviously is based on a Quranic doctrine, but if you were to philosophize it, it essentially means that we believe the individual impacts society and society impacts individuals, which is more of a communitarian approach, a communitarian philosophy. And let me give you a very beautiful example in simple terms to understand the Islamic philosophy behind self and society, which actually puts into context human rights from an Islamic and liberal perspective. The Prophet told us, society is like a boat with an upper deck and a lower deck. Now the upper deck gives fresh water to the lower deck, but the lower deck become individualistic. And they say, we're going to make a hole from the bottom deck. What happens? The boat will sink. This is exactly what we're saying about if you have an excessive, individualistic, liberal society from a social perspective. Society will sink. And we've seen it. Broken Britain, defragmentation of society, etc., etc., etc. So, this is the Islamic conception, and this is why we should see this in light of the liberal model. So when we see, for example, certain things in Islamic rights, for example, that seem very anti-liberal, we should not judge them from an individualistic perspective, because their presupposition is that the individual has primacy, individualism. There's an ontological primacy for the individual. We're saying no. We're saying there's actually a balance between societal rights and individual rights. This is why most of the UN human rights are very liberal. They're mostly individualistic. Mostly individualistic. Whereas we say no, society has rights. Society has rights. What about the right for the child to have a parent or a mother? Now don't get me wrong, this sounds very traditionalist, but I used to work for Town Hamlets Council, and single mothers were forced to work. There was an economic, social policy to get people back into jobs. What about the children? Do they have a right to have a mother? It was no wonder that Lisa Belkin, in one of her books, Confessions of a Working Mother, she said, I can't give 100% of myself to my children, to my work, to my family. Maybe we should consider the rights of children too. Also, what about the rights of almost 250,000 human beings that die every year in this country? Abortion. Some people say, what about the rights of the embryo? Do they have rights? How can we answer this question? Do we have an individualistic doctrine that has a skewed sense of personal freedom? What do we do? Obviously there's different discussions if someone's raped or whatever the case may be, but we need to start answering these questions, and they're answered by your underlying philosophy, individualism or more of a communitarian approach that Islam adheres to. I've got 5 minutes, and I think it's useful for me to end with the following points. The reason Muslims in the 21st century still hold to the Islamic conception of human rights is because of our view on the metaphysical world, on ethics and morality. Because we would say human rights from a liberal doctrine can be voted down by National Assembly. We had this. After 7/7, you had people in Parliament saying, we need to change the Human Rights Act in order for us to get our laws across. Think about how stupid this sounds. They make their God in the morning and they want him for dinner in the evening. You know, this doctrine of human rights, and it's disgusting. It's that gospel truth in the morning, and by the evening, we'll change it. And this is a problem. But from an Islamic perspective, because we believe rights, values, and morality is pegged on God, it's pegged on the divine, no National Assembly can vote it down. Because God is the only conceptual anchor that transcends human subjectivity, that transcends human difference. And it is no wonder that the great Muslim scholar of the 20th century, an Asian subcontinent scholar, he said, and listen to this very carefully, when we speak of human rights in Islam, we really mean that these rights have been granted by God. They have not been granted by any king or by any legislative assembly. These rights granted by the kings or the legislative assemblies can also be withdrawn in the same manner in which they are conferred. The same is the case with the rights accepted and recognized by the dictators. They can confer them when they please and withdraw them when they wish, and they can openly violate them when they like. But since in Islam human rights have been conferred by God, no legislative assembly in the world or any government on earth has the right or authority to make an amendment or change in the rights conferred by God. No one has the right to abrogate them or withdraw them, nor are they the basic human rights which are conferred on paper for the sake of show and exhibition and denied in actual life when the show is over. Nor are they like philosophical concepts which have no sanctions behind them. And this is an apt way of ending today's presentation. So hopefully it's been an interesting discussion. We've discussed some of the human rights from an Islamic perspective: right to life, safety of life, honor and dignity of women, basic standard of living, individual rights to liberty, right to justice, equality of human beings, and so forth. We also said what makes liberal conception of human rights and Islamic conception of human rights different is because the underlying philosophy on the individual society. We discussed that liberalism has a very individualistic or atomistic view. We don't have that view, therefore some of our conceptions of human rights will differ. And also we said the reason we Muslims powerfully believe in these rights because they're not based on National Assembly or any form of the whims of a human being, but rather they're anchored in God, and God as a concept is the only idea that transcends human subjectivity. Anything I've said that's wrong has come from my ego. Anything I've said that's right has come from God. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت واستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Thank you very much for listening. I assume you have a Q&A. Yeah? You have a Q&A?
Excellent. Go on.
Right, we make our
principles is all subjective, but when we take all into account, we have the Quran.
Yes.
When someone reads the Quran, isn't it their own interpretation of what they read? So isn't that subjective? So isn't, like, I understand that God, as a transcendent being, he's objective, but when somebody reads his word, they'll take from a subjective interpretation. Like, so.
That's a very good point, I agree. But what you've conflated there is moral and ethical ontology, so the foundations of morality, and moral and ethical epistemology, how to get to know what they are. So you're right, there could be subjectivity in interpreting what God says, but once you come to a conclusion, its foundation's objective. Do you see the point here? There's a difference in morals themselves being grounded in God, which makes them objective, but the question then says, how do I get to know what they are? That's your question, and there's a difference, there's a conflation here. Because yes, there may be a scope of interpretation of certain aspects of rights in the Quran, but once you get to a conclusion, they still can't be voted down by National Assembly. They still can't be changed because of the whims of a human being. The scope of interpretation is there. There may be a difference in that scope, but once you form a conclusion, they're still grounded in God. And that's the point here. Because when people even approach ethics, rights, or values from an Islamic perspective, they approach them from the perspective that God sent them. Do you see? And there's a total different paradigm there. Are you satisfied with that? Good, thank you. Yes?
I would like to question on your last statement which you made that God's rights cannot be abrogated now. But my question is, why are we Muslims inclining towards apologetic mentalities? For example, we have calls for European Islam, British Islam,
yes,
the reinterpretation of the text.
Yes.
So why are we being apologetic, and as Muslims, how should we tackle this problem?
Yes. Well, we're being apologetic because we're stupid. Frankly, because what we do, we say, oh my God, look at the West. We need to jump on this bandwagon because it's going somewhere really nice, it's a beautiful place, progress, freedom, justice, transparency. So we jump on the bandwagon, right? And we're like, oh, the Quranic baggage is a bit heavy. So we start throwing some pages off, yeah? And then, this is the reality of Muslims. There's nothing more profound of saying, this is my tradition, I want to live with you as a human being in this society, there's nothing wrong with that, but this is my tradition. It's unique in some ways and similar in other ways. So I think it's more of a mindset. Malcolm X, what did he say? He called it the house Negro and the field Negro. The house nigger and the field nigger. He said the house nigger was just like that. Oh, the white master. When the white master said we, the house nigger would say we. Yeah? You know, that's what Malcolm X would say, right? But with the field nigger, the one who was enslaved, he'll be praying for his destruction. Yeah? And that's the reality of the Muslim today. If you read Malcolm X's autobiography, it transcends time. Take away the word Negro, put Muslim in there, and you've got political analysis for the next 10 years at least. Yeah? Because he was saying things like, you're going to get people apologetic who have non-negotiable philosophical baggage. What does that mean? I believe in liberalism. I believe in social liberalism. I believe in individualism. They're all true. Therefore, I have to superimpose that on the Quranic text. Now, the way to discuss with them is not to talk Islam with them, in my opinion. There's two things to talk with them. First, tell them to man up, as the Americans say. Man up, no? Yeah? That's what they say. Just be a man, or be a human being. Be confident in what you should believe in. And the second, which is more profound, discuss the philosophical baggage they bring to the text. And that's very important. This doesn't mean we're totally different from a liberal tradition, because some things in Islam are more liberal than liberals. For example, I could marry 4 wives. That's more liberal than liberals, right? They're going to have one. Yeah? So we're liberal from that perspective. Yeah? So there's all these different things, like, there's some similarities, but from a philosophical perspective, there are some distinctions. And this one, when the Quran mentions about to get to know one another, the tafsir, the exegesis of that verse is about distinction. What makes you distinct so you know how to relate with that person now. But now the lines are so blurred now. And you have, in my opinion, so-called scholars, well, the scholars in their own right, but the scholars who come and say, we're the European form of Islam, as if Europeans, when a European has another arm and another leg, then yes, we're in another European form of Islam. That's what Bruce Lee said about martial arts, right? He said, if someone has another arm and leg, then yes, we could talk about a different form of martial arts. But it's all the same. We use to express ourselves, we express our human body in that way. So, when Europeans start having like, 3 eyes and 3 ears and another brain, then we can have a different form of Islam. Because Islam came for who? A human being, right? So I don't know why we have a different conception wherever we are. And I've traveled the world a bit, gone to America, and especially seen Muslims in the West. And what's beautiful is when you see the normal Muslim, they express themselves in the same way. They still hold on to their religion, they still want to express Islam in the 21st century, they're looking for answers, but they still stick to a certain methodology, which is let's derive values from our tradition, rather than already adopt alien values and superimpose it on our tradition. That's a very bad way of dealing with things. And we should learn lessons when we look into Western tradition. When we look into liberalism, the last thing we want to do is superimpose Islam on the liberal tradition, because we won't be understanding the liberal tradition for what it really is. Do you see? It's like a pugnacious type of attitude. So on both sides, we need to basically liberate ourselves from this kind of understanding. Are you happy with that? Thank you. Yeah.
I have a slightly different question. Like, what are the rights of minorities in Islam? Minorities in a state, like there is a group which denies the finality of prophethood. Like being in a state, should you allow them to carry out the dawah?
Okay, that's a very good question. Like the brother was saying, what are the rights of the minorities in Islam? Well, they're very clear. They could have their own judicial disputes and authorities, specifically in the Judeo-Christian tradition. They have the rights in terms of all the rights I mentioned about sanctity of life, etc., etc., etc. However, and to be very honest, according to the classical ulama, the classical scholarship, we do not allow the propagation of, for example, a philosophy or perspective that goes against our understanding of the good society. For example, if you have the Qadianis, for example, which mainstream Muslims say they're not even Muslim because they don't believe the Prophet was final. Yeah? Can they now have a stall and start preaching their material? No, they can't. It's as simple as that. They just can't. And you just have to see that from a non-individualistic perspective and see it from the perspective of we actually believe in an absolute truth, and we do, and in someone believing in absolute truth, we do allow a certain level of liberty from that. But anything that goes undermines the conception of a good society, then we'll say no, you can't propagate yourself.
But the same we are doing in the West, like we being Muslims here, we are primarily going against the basic beliefs of Christianity. So they are allowing us to like propagate our beliefs. So should we allow them as well? Although I don't believe on it.
No, really. Well, they allow you to fornicate. Does it mean you should fornicate? I mean, that's not consistent philosophy. They allow you to drink. As a Muslim, will you drink just because they allow you to drink? No, it doesn't go that way. Just because they allow you to do something doesn't mean you give it to them back. And this is the tradition. I mean, if anyone knows anything different, then that's fine. But this doesn't mean you can't have intellectual debate. We're talking about this on a popular level. Because if you go into Baghdad, for example, Baghdad was amazing. It was probably the first time you had atheists, Jews, Christians, and Muslims debating in universities. But it has to be in a frank, honest, structured way. Do you see? It's not like all free for all. Yeah? It can't be like, change the social norms overnight. No, it's structured. So we do want intellectual debate and dialogue. Even the Quran uses the word for debate. Jadal, right? Yes, which means to debate and to discuss and to have intellectual inquiry with other peoples. And we saw this in Baghdad, it was thriving. And there's a historical precedence, no other time that was allowed. Even the Christian tradition in Europe, other interpretations of Christianity could not even be tolerated. To the point they had to seek refuge under Islam. This is why many Christians, if you read the book by A.S. Tritton on Umar and his non-Muslim subjects, A.S. Tritton says Christians preferred Muslim rule to that of the Franks. So this was the reality in Europe. Why was the 80-year wars happening and the 30-year wars and the massacre in St. Bartholomew was there? This was because of the Protestant and Catholic tradition at loggerheads with each other. Okay, maybe some people argue it was used for political means, we could have that discussion, but whatever the case may be, there was bloodshed in the name of religion. And it was the same tradition. Do you see? Yes?
Would you mind if we talk about something controversial?
Yeah, fine. Was that controversial?
Something more controversial.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, with regard to the freedoms of sexual orientation and the freedom to choose your own sexual identity.
Yeah.
We know that this is clearly unacceptable in Islam.
Yes.
But then, when speaking against it can become a criminal offense in Western countries, how should a Muslim, like what should the attitude of a Muslim be?
It's not a criminal offense.
Like it could be. In America, for example, there was, I think he was a Christian preacher, and he said homosexuality is against my religion, and the authority chose to prosecute him. I don't know if he was convicted at the end.
No, I don't think so. I don't think
There was British.
It was
British.
No, the British guys were actually becoming really naughty. They were saying they should be killed. They were inciting to hatred and violence. It's a different reality. This is the way I do it, okay? Which may be wrong, but this is how I do it. I say, homosexuality is a sin in Islam. Just like swinger parties. Just like anything else that's outside of male-female interaction under marriage. This is our view, our conception of family in any society. This is our view, just like the Christian and the Jewish view. However, it doesn't mean now that we hate and we call for violence to these individuals. No way. That's not the reality. Yes, we do believe the public manifestation of homosexuality is a criminal offense under the Islamic legal framework. We don't have the Islamic legal framework here. And if we did, we probably couldn't do anything anyway, because it's more of a deterrent, because you have to see them doing the act in public. And even in Soho, you don't see that, man. Did you see the point? You know, so the point I'm trying to say is that's the reality, and it's a deterrent. Now the discussion we'll be having is homosexuality innate? That's the discussion. Is it natural? Now if you think of it from the perspective that it's natural because primates do it, and birds do it, and human beings do it because they're part of nature, yes, that's natural. But so other things could be deemed that way as natural, like pedophilia, or killing and murder. So that's not a healthy discussion. Even the genetic discussion is wrong anyway. You know why? Because they found genetic genes relating to criminality. So what do? You don't punish people anymore? Not put them in prisons because it's my nature to be a bad person? Are we going to accept that in this society? Of course not. So the debate, it's a ridiculous debate that people are having, right? My point is, we should start thinking about spiritual remedies to these things. Yeah? And I do believe people can change. People can change any type of orientation, whether it's the other way around. People from heterosexual orientation could change to homosexual orientation. Yeah? I've seen it, man. And from homosexual orientation, you could go the other way. That has been there. There's been so many successes that you've seen. So my point is, I think it's more, if it's this is for Muslims. If a Muslim happens to have homosexual inclinations, I would do psychodynamic on him. I would say, well, how's your relationship with your father and your mother? Honestly, if you look at a lot of studies, there's a lot of issues between the homosexual person and his father or his parents. Go to any normal psychology journals, you see these issues happening, right? So, I think a lot of it is social, a lot of it is spiritual, and a lot of it is a test, because we believe, life here, we're not here to have a party. God has given you a test. If a Muslim has those inclinations, we don't condemn them. We don't say you're a bad person, because you're not condemned for thoughts and feelings. Yeah? Rather, it's the action itself that's condemnable. You see? So we need to be nuanced, because a lot of us, right, we're like, they're gay, bad man. Yeah, we try and we're really rude. But we're really bad to our own mothers. We won't even take them from A to B with our own car because we're lazy. That's the biggest sin in Islam, being bad to your mother. Because what does Allah say in the Quran? Worship me, then be good to my parents. Many of us will never be good to our own parents, and then we're complaining about this homosexual society or someone who's gay. This is ridiculous. Honestly, our priorities are messed up. So what we need to understand is, we should see it from a holistic perspective. Yeah? But it doesn't mean we compromise. No, it's haram, it's forbidden. Yeah? And a public manifestation in Islamic law is a criminal act. This is our view. But we don't call for violence against homosexuals. No way. And we don't call for hatred for an individual who has his inclinations. No way. Rather, we take them as a human being and we help them if they want to change, especially in the Islamic paradigm. Yeah? But it's very unhealthy that it's becoming using as a yardstick to find out if you have British values or not. And I think that's terrible. I think that's terrible because it doesn't allow people to really express themselves in the 21st century as people of a certain particular belief or persuasion. And it's very nasty. This is the hegemony of liberalism. You have to believe in these values, otherwise we won't even consider you to discuss and have a platform with you. That's atrocious. It's atrocious. And who draws the line and where? There's an organization in Belgium called NAMBLA. Have you heard of it? The North American Men Boys Love Association. And they were using human rights legislation to justify how old 60-year-olds could sleep with 3-year-old boys or 7-year-old boys because it's consent. Now, I'm not equivocating homosexuality with that, but who draws the line and where? Because these things change. Remember, in 73 was the big court case about legalizing homosexuality. They used to use the ancient Greeks as an example. We got our democracy from there, and all of them were bisexual and homosexual, most of them, and they were. If you go to Google, Wikipedia, and type in pederasty, which is like homosexual pedophilia, if you like, was well known in Greek culture. Well known. So, you want to have kids? Sleep with a woman. You want to have fun? Sleep with a small boy. That's why they're very successful in war, because they used to get partners fight together. So when one partner was dying out of his love, he wanted to support him. Even the army men, right? They used to have little boys, whether in the trenches, whatever kind of condition they were in, to play with them. This was Greek culture at the time. The bastions of philosophy and progress. But yeah, that's the history. And so they used that to justify it. Yes?
So at university, the atheist society gets together and then they want to invite somebody from the ex-Muslim Council of Britain.
The ex-Muslim Council,
yeah. To talk about how Islam is barbaric and Sharia law is problematic. How would you suggest we deal with it?
Yeah, invite them, discuss with them.
Would you suggest we go to the talk and then challenge them in the Q&A?
No, I think you should have a speaker on the panel. Definitely.
Are you free Thursday?
you have a speaker on the panel. Definitely. If not, then if not, you should boycott it.
But
yeah, because I know them well. I've asked the ex-Muslim Council of Britain to have a discussion, and they've said no many times. What they seem to like to be judge, jury, and executioner, just like Richard Dawkins. He was formally invited in Leicester, Democracy University, to debate with myself. He rejected, yeah, because he likes to debate 12-year-olds. If you saw his program on Channel 4, you know, the 12-year-old girls in Muslim school. Don't believe in God, believe in me. Yeah, that's the kind of he's a coward, and people like that are very cowardly. In my opinion, I mean, if you see Miriam Namazi, who used to run ex-Muslim Council of Britain, she's coward. She wouldn't debate with a Muslim. Hardly, rarely, and she does. It's selective. So you should get someone on the panel, and if they reject, I think you should boycott it, because these people tend to have a way of wanting to be judge, jury, and executioner. There's no nuanced discussion with these people, from my humble experience. Yeah? What do you expect from an organization that names itself ex-Muslim Council of Britain? And then, but its agenda is quite broad, but it names itself specific. What does that mean? This just like, they're just they're haters, man. That's what they are. Hate me, but with knowledge. Wallahi, hate me with knowledge, you're not hate me with ignorance. That's the worst form of hate. Any other questions? Yes, sister.
I think that you see a lot of the problems emerging kind of even within liberal circles when it comes to human rights and emergencies and derogations and kind of their own kind of self-destruct buttons in human rights treaties. And I know that, for example, in the time of our movement of God, when there was a famine, he stopped the punishment for stealing.
Yes.
And I was wondering, are there any examples of emergency kind of derogations of rights in Islam?
Yes. See, Umar ibn Khattab, he didn't suspend the Sharia. It's a very nuanced point we need to understand. This is the narrative of some scholars like Ramadan and others, which they have their view, that say, look, you can suspend the Sharia. It wasn't a suspension. It was part of the conditions for implementation. It was the Sharia. So the Sharia says, if there's poverty, if there's mass poverty, then punishment cannot be applied. That's the Sharia. It's not a suspension of it. And it's a crucial difference to make Because if you take the one side that says, yes, emergency suspension or moratorium, then what you do then, you enter into the modernity thesis, which I believe Islam has transcended the modernity thesis. Because what does modernism mean? It means that Islam, that traditional values can't deal with modern